Mara sat on the edge of the cliff, her legs dangling over the jagged rocks, staring down at the canyon below. The wind whipped around her, tugging at her hair and rattling the dry brush behind her, but she barely noticed. She hadn't moved much. In days, hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken to anyone. The world felt heavy, suffocating, like she was trapped beneath an invisible weight she couldn't lift. Every breath she took seemed to echo the hollow ache in her chest, a pain that was physical and emotional all at once. It had started weeks ago, though the memory was already beginning to blur, fading at the edges like a dream. She remembered the crash, the screech of metal, the sudden darkness, and the searing heat of panic that clawed at her chest. But what lingered wasn't just the memory of the event. It was the aftermath. The nights filled with trembling, the days filled with silence, the sudden, unpredictable bursts of grief that left her gasping for air as if the very sky had turned against her. She hugged her knees to her chest, pressing her face into them as though the pressure could ground her, could keep her tethered to something real. The pain was relentless, creeping into every corner of her mind and body. It wasn't the kind of pain that could be bandaged or medicated. Pills dulled it, distractions postponed it, but nothing erased it. She had tried to talk to friends, to family, even to strangers who claimed they understood. But each conversation ended the same way, with her retreating, exhausted, convinced that no one could possibly feel the depth of what she was carrying. Mara's mind wandered through the canyon of memories that had brought her here. Each recollection was jagged, raw, unshaped by the passage of time. She thought of the laughter that had turned into silence, of the comfort that had dissolved into fear, of the promises that had been broken. Every fragment stung with the intensity of things lost. She had become a ghost in her own life, moving through the motions without connection, without hope that it would ever feel different. The canyon below reflected her state. Its vast emptiness mirrored the hollow in her chest. She could see the jagged edges of the cliffs, the way the sunlight cut through dust and stone, illuminating both beauty and desolation at once. She wondered if she was more like the canyon, now carved and hollowed by forces beyond her control, worn by time, untouchable. The wind tugged at her again, and she flinched, as if it might carry her away, yet a part of her longed to be carried, to be lifted out of herself even for a moment. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned that showing weakness only made her feel more exposed, more vulnerable. Better to sit in silence and let the pain simmer inside her, untouched by the world. Yet the ache pressed on relentlessly, a constant reminder that hiding didn't make it vanish. The isolation that had once seemed protective now felt like another kind of trap. Mara didn't just hurt, she was exhausted from hurting, exhausted from carrying the invisible weight alone, somewhere deep in her chest. A quiet, almost forgotten part of herself whispered that she wanted relief, a way to feel safe again. But that whisper was fragile, easily drowned by the roar of grief and despair that dominated her every thought. She stared at the canyon floor again, at the shadows stretching across the rocks, and wondered if anyone could ever reach her here. In the depths of a pain so complete it felt like it could swallow her whole, and in that lonely moment, Mara whispered to herself, almost without hope, "It hurts too much." Mara's whisper was lost to the wind, but the canyon heard it. At least, that's how it felt when a voice low, steady, and unexpected broke through the silence behind her. "You're not alone out here." Mara jerked, startled, twisting around to see who had spoken. Her first thought was that she had imagined it, another trick of her frayed mind. But then she saw him. A man stood several feet away, tall and broad-shouldered, his posture relaxed yet commanding, like someone who had long ago learned how to blend with the land. His skin was burnished by the sun, his dark hair pulled back with a leather tie, and his eyes deep, steady, and unreadable were fixed on her with a patience that unsettled her more than aggression ever could. He wore simple clothes, worn but cared for, and carried himself with the weight of someone who didn't need to prove anything. The desert winds seemed to circle him differently, as if even the air respected his presence. Mara's heart thudded in her chest, but not from fear at least, not the kind she expected. "Don't come closer," she snapped, her voice rough from disuse. Her body tensed, ready to defend her solitude. She didn't want anyone here, not when she was raw and broken, not when her only armor was silence. The man inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than challenge. He didn't move closer. He didn't retreat either. He simply remained as though his presence was an unspoken answer to her protest. "This is a dangerous place to sit," he said after a pause, his tone calm, neither intrusive nor commanding. "The wind shifts quickly in the canyon. One strong gust and you might not have a choice in whether you fall." His words stung, not because of their truth, but because they revealed how transparent she was. Mara narrowed her eyes. "And what business is that of yours?" He studied her for a long moment before replying, his gaze unwavering but not harsh. "None, if that's how you want it. I was passing through, saw you sitting here. I thought you should know that someone else sees you." The phrase cut through her like a blade. Someone else sees you. It had been so long since she felt seen, truly seen, rather than glanced at, pitied, or overlooked. Yet she pushed back, defensive. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about what I'm doing here." A faint flicker of something compassion, perhaps, moved across his features, but his voice remained steady. "I don't need to know everything. Sometimes it's enough to sit with someone who hurts." Mara clenched her fists, torn between anger and the unexpected pull of his words. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him to leave her to her suffering, but a quieter voice within her whispered that maybe, just maybe, she didn't want him to leave. "Why would you care?" she asked bitterly. For the first time, the man moved. Closer, but slowly, deliberately, stopping a respectful distance away. His eyes softened, though his posture remained steady, grounded like the canyon itself. "My people have a saying," he replied. "Pain is not a thing to be carried alone. It's meant to be shared, or it eats the spirit. You say it hurts too much. Then let me stand here until it hurts less." The canyon fell silent again, but the silence felt different now, less oppressive, more open. Mara stared at him, unable to find words. Part of her screamed that this was foolish, that she should send him away. But another part, fragile and trembling, recognized something in him she hadn't found anywhere else. Presence without judgment, strength without demand. For the first time in weeks, Mara felt the faintest shift inside her, not relief, not healing, but the smallest crack in the wall she had built around her pain. And though she didn't yet realize it, this encounter would be the beginning of something she thought impossible, the long, patient journey back toward herself. Mara shifted uncomfortably under the man's gaze, her chest tightening as if he had peeled away a layer she had carefully hidden. She didn't know him, didn't want to know him, and yet he stood there, speaking words that landed too close. To the truth, her first instinct was defense. Always defense. "You don't get it," she said sharply, her voice cracking halfway through. "You stand there talking like you understand pain, like you know me. But you don't, you can't, so just leave." The man didn't flinch. He didn't meet her anger with anger, nor did he retreat. He remained still, like stone weathered by storms, patient in the face of her fury. His eyes, steady and dark, never broke from hers. "I didn't say I understood your pain," he replied softly. "I only said I could sit with you in it." The words frustrated her. How could he speak so simply, as if the complexity of her suffering could be met with silence and presence? It made no sense. People always wanted to fix things, to offer advice, to force her toward healing she wasn't ready for. But this man, this stranger, seemed to offer nothing and everything at once. Her breath came fast. She clenched her fists. In the fabric of her jeans, her nails digging into the denim. "You can't sit with this," she spat. "You think I'm just sad? That I need company? You have no idea how deep this goes. It's not something you can wait out like bad weather." The man finally moved, lowering himself to the ground a few feet away. He didn't crowd her space, but he didn't leave either. Sitting cross-legged on the dry earth, he rested his hands. Calmly on his knees, his gaze turning outward toward the canyon rather than directly at her. "I'm not here to name your pain," he said. "Only you can do that. But I can be here while you name it." The calmness of his tone infuriated her. How dare he act as though he had a right to stay, to wedge himself into the sacred space of her suffering? She wanted to scream at him, to demand that he vanish into the desert like a mirage. Yet beneath her anger was something even more unsettling. Fear. Fear that he was sincere. Fear that if she let him stay, she might no longer be able to hide behind. The wall she had built, she turned away, hugging her knees tighter to her chest, her forehead pressed against them. "I don't want you here," she whispered, though her voice carried less conviction than before. "I hear you," the man said, his tone respectful, "and if you truly want me to go, I will. But something in you hasn't sent me away, not fully." The words pierced her. She hated that they rang true. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but her silence betrayed her. The canyon wind howled for a moment, swirling dust around them, then quieted again. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, fast and uneven, and his quiet breathing. Beside her, the stillness between them stretched out, uncomfortable and yet oddly grounding. Finally, she broke it, though her voice trembled. "It hurts too much. Don't you get that? It's not just sadness. It's like my bones ache. My chest burns. My mind won't stop tearing me apart. How could you possibly sit here through that?" The man turned his head toward her, his expression unreadable yet gentle. "Because pain has a rhythm," he said. "It comes like waves. And when the wave is too heavy for one, another can help bear it, even if it's just by sitting still." Mara closed her eyes, torn between pushing him away and letting his words settle into her. Distrust coiled tightly around her heart, but somewhere beneath it, the faintest ember of curiosity glowed. Could he truly mean what he said? She didn't know. And she wasn't ready to trust him. Not yet. But for reasons she couldn't explain, she didn't tell him to leave again. The canyon grew quiet again, as if holding its breath alongside them. Mara's body remained tense, every muscle drawn tight, ready to spring if the stranger moved too quickly. Yet he didn't. He sat there still and grounded, as if he had all the time in the world. For Mara, that stillness was unnerving. People were never still, not in her world. They shifted, they fidgeted, they spoke too much or too little, trying to steer her feelings one way or another. But this man simply existed beside her, like the canyon itself. It made her feel exposed. Her pain no longer swallowed in silence, but mirrored back in the presence of another. Finally, she broke first. "You don't understand," she said, her voice a thin whisper torn between anger and exhaustion. "It hurts too much. I can't breathe some days. I can't sleep without waking up shaking. It's like I'm carrying a fire inside me, and it never goes out." Her throat tightened as she said it. Admitting it aloud felt dangerous, like bearing a wound that might only invite more harm. She braced herself for pity, for false reassurance, for the same hollow phrases she had heard from others. "You'll be okay. Time heals. Be strong." But none of those came. Instead, the man turned his gaze back to her, his eyes steady and unflinching. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet yet full. a tone that seemed to carry more weight than the words themselves. "Then let me hold you until it no longer does." The words startled her. They weren't what she expected, and because of that, they slipped past her defenses before she could stop them. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. She wanted to scoff, to laugh bitterly, to accuse him of speaking in riddles. But when she looked at him, she saw no mockery, no empty comfort. His expression was steady, marked with sincerity so deep it unsettled her. "You can't promise that," she said harshly, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "You can't just hold me until it's gone. It doesn't work like that." His gaze didn't falter. "I didn't promise to take it away," he said. "I promised to stay until it changes shape. Pain always does. It may never vanish, but it shifts. My being here won't erase it. But I can make sure you're not alone inside it." Mara shook her head, tears stinging her eyes despite her will. "And why? Why would you care? You don't even know my name." The faintest curve of a smile touched his lips, not playful, but almost reverent. "Because you're a human being standing on the edge of a canyon, whispering to the wind that it hurts too much. I don't need your name to know your soul is tired. And in my people's way, no soul should carry its pain alone." His words cut through her like sunlight piercing storm clouds. She wanted desperately not to believe him, not to let the fragile hope inside her rise. Hope was dangerous. Hope only made the eventual crash hurt worse. And yet something in his tone, in the quiet strength of his presence, made her want to believe him. She wrapped her arms tighter around her knees, trying to steady herself. I don't know if I can let anyone hold me," she admitted, voice breaking. "Every time I've trusted someone, it's ended in more pain." He nodded, as though he understood without needing details. "Then don't trust me yet," he said simply. "Let me sit here until you do, or until you don't. Either way, I will remain, if you allow it." The canyon seemed to exhale with them, the wind softening into a gentler breeze that tugged at her hair. Mara didn't answer. She could not yet. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel completely swallowed by the fire inside her, and though she hated to admit it, his promise had planted a small, stubborn seed in the ashes of her pain, the possibility that she might not have to endure it alone. The following days unfolded slowly, marked not by grand revelations or sudden transformations, but by small shifts, the kind that were easy to miss if one wasn't paying close attention. Mara hadn't agreed to anything. She hadn't told the Apache man Tay, as he eventually introduced himself, that he could stay. And yet he remained. He kept his word without pressing her, a steady presence on the canyon's edge. Some days he spoke only a few words, other days none at all. When she turned away from him, he did not chase her with conversation. When she withdrew into silence, he matched it, letting the quiet hold them both. At first, his patience frustrated her. She wanted him to break, to give up, to leave her to the pain that had become almost familiar. But each morning, when she dragged herself to the same cliff, he was there, seated cross-legged, waiting. Not expectant, not demanding. Just their one evening, when the sun bled orange across the horizon, he broke their silence with something unexpected. "Breathe with me," he said. She frowned. "What?" "Breathe," he repeated, his tone calm, as if asking her to do the simplest thing in the world. "Follow my rhythm, nothing more." She almost laughed. The absurdity of it, him asking her to breathe as though that could erase the storm inside her. But her body was tired of fighting, her spirit worn thin. So, with reluctance, she closed her eyes and listened. Tay inhaled deeply, the sound steady and deliberate, like wind moving through pine trees. He exhaled slowly, as though releasing more than air. Mara tried to follow, her breath jagged at first, shallow and uneven. Shame prickled her skin. How could something so basic feel so impossible? But he didn't comment. He only continued, inhale, exhale, patient and unbroken. After a few minutes, Mara's breathing began to match his. For the first time in weeks, her chest loosened, just slightly, as if the fire inside her had been given room to shift. When she opened her eyes, the sky was darker, stars piercing the twilight. She glanced at him, startled to find that a strange calm had settled in her body, fragile but real. "What was that?" she asked quietly. "A way my people quiet the spirit when it is restless," he said. "When the world inside feels too loud, the breath can remind us of the world outside." She turned the words over in her mind, feeling their weight. It wasn't a cure. Her pain still throbbed like an old wound, but it was the first moment in a long time she felt something other than drowning. The days continued in this rhythm. Sometimes he taught her small things, how to notice the patterns of the wind through the canyon, how to find water by listening for the faint songs of insects, how to sit still until the earth itself seemed to breathe beneath her. Other times, they said nothing at all. And strangely, the silence with him didn't sting the way it did alone. One morning, as dawn stretched pale light across the cliffs, Mara realized something that startled her. She hadn't thought about the accident in hours. The ache was still there, yes, but it hadn't devoured every thought. For the first time in weeks, her mind had rested. Even briefly, it frightened her, because if pain could loosen its grip, then so could the walls she'd built around it. Letting go, even slightly, felt like stepping off a cliff. But it also offered something she hadn't dared to imagine, the possibility of breathing without burning. When she looked at Tay, seated quietly with the rising sun painting his features, she found herself whispering words she hadn't planned. "It still hurts." He nodded, turning to meet her gaze. "It will," he said simply. "But now you're not hurting alone." Mara felt her throat tighten, tears welling unbidden. She didn't want to cry in front of him, but she didn't hide her face either. And for once, the tears didn't feel like weakness. They felt like the smallest beginning of release. The canyon had become their meeting ground, a silent witness to each fragile step Mara took toward healing. Days bled into each other, measured not by clocks or obligations, but by the shifting of light across stone. At first, Mara spoke little. Words felt dangerous, sharp-edged things that cut her as she tried to form them. But the silence with Tay was different than silence alone. It held space, like a vessel waiting to be filled, never demanding, never rushing. One evening, after the sky had dimmed into indigo and stars began piercing the darkness, Mara felt the walls inside her begin to tremble. She sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the shadows below, the words pressing against her throat. She had swallowed them for weeks, maybe longer, locking them away where no one could see. But now, with Tay beside her, something inside insisted they needed air. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Tay didn't look at her directly. He kept his gaze on the canyon, his posture unhurried, as though he knew any sudden move might cause her to retreat. "Tell me," he said quietly. Mara's chest ached. She dug her nails into her arms as if to anchor herself. One moment, everything was normal. We were laughing. We were just driving. Then she stopped, her breath snagging, memory flooding in like a storm surge. The screech of tires, the shattering glass, the weightless moment before impact. Then it was gone, just like that. And I walked away when they didn't. The last words tore from her throat like a confession. Hot tears blurred her vision, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. She hated crying, hated how vulnerable it made her feel, but the dam had broken and there was no stopping it now. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice raw. "Why am I still here when they're not? Why does the world think I should keep living when it feels like my chest is carved out every time I breathe? Her body shook with the force of her sobbing, grief clawing its way out of her. She expected him to try and soothe her, to tell her she shouldn't think that way, that life still had meaning. That's what everyone else had said, their empty words bouncing off the hollow cavern inside her, but Tay didn't speak. He let her cry, his silence a shield rather than a dismissal. When her sobs began to slow into ragged breaths, he finally turned toward her, his eyes steady. "Rooted, you're carrying survivor's fire," he said softly. "It burns differently than grief alone. It asks questions with no answers, and it punishes you for still breathing. It is a cruel fire, but it is also proof that you are still alive." Mara's lips trembled, her throat tight. "It doesn't feel like living. It feels like punishment," he nodded slowly. "Yes, that's how it feels, but punishment is not the truth of it. The truth is that your breath is still here. And your breath, no matter how heavy, carries the memory of those who left. That is not punishment, it is witness." His words settled over her, not extinguishing the fire inside, but shifting how it burned. For the first time, someone had spoken to the ache without trying to erase it, without demanding it vanish. Mara wiped her face with the back of her hand, exhausted but strangely lighter, as though the act of giving voice to her pain had loosened a knot inside her chest. She didn't feel healed, not even close, but she felt heard. And in that moment, being heard was more powerful than she expected. She leaned her head against her knees again, whispering, "I don't know how to keep going." Tay's gaze returned to the stars. "You don't have to know tonight," he sighed. "You only have to breathe. Tomorrow we'll see if you can breathe again. That is enough." And for the first time since the accident, Mara believed that maybe, just maybe, it could be. Night in the canyon had its own weight. The air grew cooler, the sound sharper, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind against stone. Mara had come to both fear and crave these nights. They offered no distractions, no escape, only the raw ache of her thoughts echoing louder against the silence. That night, the ache became unbearable. She sat by the fire Tay had built, its flames licking upward, casting long shadows across the canyon walls. He sat opposite her, quiet as always, his posture steady, his eyes reflecting the flicker of the flames. Mara tried to steady her breathing, to keep her composure, but her body betrayed her. Her hands shook, her chest tightened. The storm she had been holding back for weeks threatened to tear through her. At first, she resisted. She bit her lip, digging her nails into her palms, trying to keep the dam intact. But grief doesn't ask permission. It surged upward, unstoppable, until it broke her open. "I can't do this," she cried suddenly, her voice breaking. The words tore out of her like something wild, something caged too long. She doubled over, clutching her stomach as sobs racked her body. "It's too much, it hurts too much." The fire blurred through her tears, her vision swimming. Shame and despair tangled together inside her. She hated being this exposed, this broken in front of him. Yet the pain was too vast, too consuming, for pride to survive. She wept openly, her body shaking as though grief itself was trying to rip her apart from the inside. Tay didn't rush to her. He didn't smother her with platitudes or try to hush her cries. Instead, he rose slowly, deliberately, and crossed the space between them. Kneeling beside her, he placed a strong, steady hand on her shoulder. He said nothing at first. His presence was the language, the anchor in the storm. Mara collapsed into him before she could think, her body giving way to the need she had denied for so long. He gathered her gently into his arms, not gripping, not confining, just holding. Her sobs spilled into his chest, muffled by the fabric of his shirt. His heartbeat was slow, unshaken, a rhythm her own broken one could cling to. "I can't," She gasped between sobs. "I can't keep carrying this." His voice rumbled low and steady above her, the sound grounding her even as the storm raged. "Then don't carry it alone. Let me share it. Let the earth share it. You are not meant to hold it all by yourself." She shook her head violently against him, her tears soaking his shirt. "It doesn't go away. It doesn't stop." He pressed his cheek lightly against her hair, his arms unyielding around her. "No, it doesn't go away. But it changes. It will shift, little by little, until it becomes something you can live beside. And until then, I will hold you. Through every wave, through every night, until you remember how to stand in it without breaking." The sobs kept coming, wave after wave, until she was trembling from exhaustion. But something began to change in the rhythm of her grief. The sharp edges softened as she cried herself empty, her body surrendering to the release. She clung to him, too weak to push him away, and for once she didn't want to. The fire crackled. The night stretched on. And though Mara's tears did not erase the pain, they carved space within it, space where Tay's steady presence anchored her. When her sobs finally slowed into ragged breaths, she felt drained but strangely lighter. Not healed, she knew that word was still far off, but lighter, as if she had set down a burden for just a little while. She whispered into the fabric of his shirt, her voice hoarse, "You really mean it, you'll stay." His arms tightened gently around her, firm and sure. "I'll stay," he said, "until it no longer hurts too much." And for the first time since her world had shattered, Mara allowed herself to believe he might be telling the truth. The morning after her breakdown felt different. Not lighter, exactly. The ache in Mara's chest still pulsed with every breath, but there was a subtle shift, like a crack in storm clouds letting in the faintest sliver of light. She woke to the warmth of the sun brushing her face, the canyon walls glowing with the soft hues of dawn. Tay was already awake, tending the small fire. He didn't comment on the night before. He didn't remind her of how hard she had cried or how long she had clung to him. He simply nodded when she sat up, as though acknowledging her presence. Was enough. That small mercy, his refusal to treat her like something fragile or broken, allowed her to breathe without shame. For the first time, she didn't feel swallowed by embarrassment over her vulnerability. Later, when the sun was high and the desert heat pressed down, Tay suggested they walk. Mara resisted at first. Her body felt heavy, her spirit heavier. She hadn't wanted to move from the safety of her cliff for days, fearing the world beyond it would demand too much of her. But something in his quiet insistence nudged her forward. They walked slowly along the canyon's edge. Tay pointed out things she would have otherwise missed. The tracks of a fox etched in the dust, the way the wind carved delicate patterns into the stone, the call of a hawk circling above. At first, Mara only nodded absently, her mind still, half anchored in sorrow. But gradually, her eyes began to notice what he saw. When the hawk dove and then rose again, catching a current of air that lifted it effortlessly, Mara felt a strange stirring in her chest. For just a moment, her grief loosened its grip, replaced by awe at the sheer grace of the bird. Tay noticed her watching. "The hawk doesn't fight the wind," he said softly. "It lets the wind carry it. That's why it soars." Mara frowned, the words landing deeper than she expected. She didn't respond, but the image stayed with her, the idea that not everything had to be fought against. That evening, as the sky deepened into amber, Mara found herself humming. It startled her as much as it startled Tay. The sound slipped out unbidden, quiet, and almost tentative, like a memory of who she used to be. She clapped her hand over her mouth, ashamed, but Tay only smiled faintly. "Your spirit remembers music," he said, "even when you don't." The comment sent heat to her cheeks, but it didn't sting. Instead, it wrapped around her like a gentle blanket, Over the next few days, Mara noticed more of these small victories. She laughed once, not a full laugh, not the kind she remembered from before, but a short, breathless sound that surprised her. She touched a wildflower growing from the cracks of stone and realized she had gone hours without thinking about the accident. She caught herself breathing more deeply, her chest less constricted than before. Each shift was tiny, almost imperceptible, but together they formed a fragile rhythm, a reminder that healing was not a sudden leap but a slow unfolding. One night, as they sat beneath the stars, Mara spoke quietly, almost afraid of the words. "Sometimes it doesn't feel like it's crushing me. Not all the time, just sometimes." Tay didn't look at her, but his voice carried quiet strength. "That is enough. Small victories are the roots of survival. You honor your pain when you notice the spaces between it." Mara leaned back against the stone wall, her eyes tracing constellations she had never noticed before. For the first time, the stars didn't feel indifferent. They felt like witnesses, and though the ache still lingered, it no longer felt like an endless sentence. Instead, it felt like something she could walk beside, if only one small victory at a time. The canyon had become a mirror for Mara. Every day she sat on its edge. She saw herself reflected in its vastness, carved by time, scarred by storms, but still standing. The emptiness she once saw as desolation began to reveal itself as endurance. And that shift unsettled her almost as much as it comforted her. One afternoon, the sky stretched cloudless and pale blue, the heat settling heavy on the land. Mara and Tay sat in silence, watching shadows lengthen along the rock. For once, Mara felt no urgency to fill the quiet with thoughts of loss. Instead, she found herself listening to the canyon itself, the low hum of wind against stone, occasional crack of shifting earth, the pulse of something eternal beneath her feet. Doubt it struck her suddenly. She was still here. After everything, after nights of despair, after the breakdown that left her shaking in Tay's arms, she had not disappeared. She was breathing. She was enduring. The realization startled her, bringing tears to her eyes, not the kind that drowned her, but the kind that softened her. "I thought I was weak," she whispered. Taye turned his gaze to her, patient, waiting. "I thought surviving meant I failed. That walking away when they didn't was cowardice. That carrying this pain meant I wasn't strong enough to let it go." Her throat tightened. "But maybe staying is its own kind of strength." Tay's eyes softened, though his expression remained steady. "You have carried a fire that would have consumed many. The fact that you breathe through it is not weakness. It is proof of your spirit's strength." Mara shook her head slowly, struggling to absorb his words. "But I still hurt, every day." "Strength does not mean the absence of pain," he said. "It means choosing to live with it, to shape it into something that can walk beside you rather than devour you. Look at yourself now. You still breathe, you still see, you still rise with the sun. That is strength." His words sank into her like water into dry earth. She realized she had spent so much time measuring herself against an impossible standard of healed, as if the only proof of strength was to feel nothing at all. But here, sitting in the canyon's embrace, she saw the truth. Strength was not the absence of hurt, it was her refusal to let the hurt erase her. Her gaze drifted upward to the cliffs. Cracks ran jagged across their surfaces, evidence of centuries of pressure and weather. Yet the cliff still stood, tall and unbroken. In those fractures she saw herself not ruined, but marked. Not destroyed, but living proof of survival. Without realizing it, Mara smiled faintly. It wasn't wide or bright, but it was real, and it surprised her. Tay noticed but didn't call attention to it. He simply inclined his head, as if acknowledging the quiet triumph without disturbing it. Later, As twilight stretched across the sky, Mara spoke again, her voice steadier than before. "I can't promise I won't break down again." "You don't need to," Tay replied. "Strength is not never breaking. It is breaking and rising again, even if you rise slowly." The words landed in her chest like a seed finding fertile ground. She looked at him then, really looked, and realized his presence had become something more than comfort. He was a mirror, too, reflecting back the strength she could not yet see in herself. For the first time since the accident, Mara believed she could keep walking, not because the pain was gone, but because she had learned she was strong enough to carry it differently, and that recognition felt like the beginning of something new. The canyon seasons shifted slowly, but Mara noticed them now. Where once the days had blurred together, marked only by the heaviness of her grief, she began to see the small transformations, the way the light softened in the evenings, the way the desert flowers unfurled after rare rains, the way the stars burned differently as the months passed. She had changed with them. Not in a way that erased her pain, she carried it still, deep in her bones, but in a way that reshaped how she lived beside it. Where once it consumed her every breath, now it was only part of her breath. The difference was small, but it was. Everything. One evening, she and Tay sat together on the cliff's edge, their shoulders nearly touching. The air was cool, the canyon awash in twilight. Mara's hands rested calmly in her lap, not clenched, not shaking. She drew in a deep breath, steady and even, and exhaled slowly. "I thought it would always own me," she said at last, her voice quiet, steady. Tay glanced at her, the faintest curve of acknowledgment in his eyes. "And now?" Mara tilted, her head back, studying the sky. "Now I see it doesn't own me. It walks with me. Some days it's heavier, some days lighter. But it's no longer the only thing I am." She turned toward him, her lips pressing into a fragile smile. "I didn't think I'd get here." He didn't answer right away, letting the silence stretch like a thread between them. Finally, he said, "You carried fire and did not let it destroy you. That is a path few can walk. You found your strength." Her throat tightened, but not with grief this time, with gratitude. She had wanted to believe she could survive, but until this moment, she hadn't realized she already had. She reached out then, almost without thinking, and rested her hand gently on his. The gesture was small, but it carried a weight she couldn't put into words. "Thank you," she whispered. Tay turned his hand so their palms met, his grip steady, grounding. "There is no debt here," he said softly. "Pain is carried in circles. One day you will hold another the way I held you. That is how it continues." Mara let his words settle inside her. She thought of the countless times she had whispered "it hurts too much" into the void, convinced no one would ever answer. And now here she was, her voice steadier, her body stronger. The canyon no longer a mirror of desolation, but a witness to endurance. As the stars brightened above them, Mara felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. The pain would never vanish, but it no longer ruled her. It had become part of her story, not the whole of it. She looked at Tay, his face illuminated by starlight, and realized something else. He had kept his promise. From the first moment he had told her, "I'm here to hold you until it no longer does," he had stayed. And though the ache had not disappeared, it no longer swallowed her whole. Mara exhaled, a long, steady breath that seemed to carry months of weight with it. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, that uncertainty didn't frighten her. She was no longer standing on the edge, ready to fall. She was standing on the edge, ready to live. And Tay, as steady as the canyon itself, remained beside her, not to shield her from pain, but to remind her that even the deepest wounds could be carried so long as they were carried together.